Déjà vu is not a glitch in the Matrix. It is the alarm system telling you the reboot failed. We have been conditioned to believe that this eerie, certain feeling that you have lived this exact moment, spoken these precise words, stood in this specific alignment of light and shadow before, is merely a benign misfiring of the temporal lobe, a simple disconnect between memory retrieval and recognition. They tell you it is the brain buffering, catching up, an electrical stutter in the machinery of consciousness. That explanation is scientifically neat, psychologically comfortable, and fundamentally terrifyingly wrong. It denies the profound metallic certainty that accompanies the experience. The cold realization that the script is repeating, and you are trapped in a loop designed by an entity far outside your perception of space-time. The true paradox of déjà vu is that it is not a memory of the past, but the faint, unbearable echo of a future that has already collapsed. My thesis is unforgiving. We are not living our first life, and this is not our primary reality. Déjà vu is evidence that our current timeline is a low-fidelity rerun, a failed experiment that the architect, whether that is God, a hyper-intelligent AI, or the indifferent force of cosmic entropy, was forced to reset. The feeling of certainty is the ghost of your true original self, momentarily punching through the veil of the current iteration, desperate to tell you where you went wrong the last time. It's not the scene itself that is familiar, it is the profound sense of inevitability that is the true haunting. If you are tired of the shallow, comforting answers, if you sense the fundamental brokenness of this world and are ready to confront the possibility that your entire existence is a computational compromise, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are going deeper than pop philosophy allows into the structural failures of reality itself. Consider the psychological weight of this scenario. If the simulation failed, it failed because of a critical variable, you. The architect didn't reset the universe because the stars aligned improperly. It reset the universe because a complex system, the human free will, the chaotic tangle of decisions, failures, and unintended consequences, hit an unrecoverable error state. Perhaps you made the wrong choice in a previous life, a devastating misstep 5 years ago that created a timeline of such existential mediocrity or catastrophic instability that the system performed an emergency rollback. Déjà vu, then, isn't just familiarity, it is shame. It is the subconscious recognition that you are navigating the same crisis point you already ruined once. The reset is rarely clean. It leaves residue, it leaves faint psychic fingerprints. When you experience déjà vu, you are momentarily syncing up with the shadow self, the version of you who is still embedded in the data stream of the previous failed timeline. This shadow self knows the immediate future of this moment because it has already lived it. It knows the punchline to the joke before it is delivered, and it knows the precise emotional texture of the disaster waiting around the corner. But here is the deeper horror. The shadow self is powerless. Its wisdom, filtered through the static of the reboot, arrives only as an unusable certainty, a useless feeling of repetition rather than actionable knowledge. This is why déjà vu is always passive. It never equips you with the ability to change the outcome, only to observe the recycled script with detached dread. Think about the pervasive sense of boredom that characterizes modern existence. If reality is constantly being recycled, edited, and redeployed, the novelties begin to wear thin. The system optimizes for stability, not surprise. This leads to the psychological phenomenon I call recycled affect, the feeling that you are experiencing strong emotions, joy, grief, ambition, that feel somehow hollow, slightly secondhand, as if the emotional reaction itself is the expected output of the previous failed run. We look at the world and see its inherent predictability, not because we are sophisticated observers, but because we are watching a rerun, where the plot points have been superficially shuffled, but the underlying narrative arc is immutable. The institutions feel old, the political crises feel tedious, and even our most passionate relationships carry the faint whiff of having been played out years ago, perhaps even between the same two souls under slightly different names. The greatest sign that your reality has been reset is the presence of timeline scars. These are the persistent, irrational fears, the deep-seated anxieties that have no apparent root in your current life experience. Why are you terrified of enclosed spaces when you've never been trapped? Why do you possess an inexplicable knowledge of a forgotten language? These are not traumas inherited genetically. They are traumas that the system failed to completely erase during the reboot. They are residual burns from the previous, devastating conclusion of your life. When déjà vu hits, it often focuses on a seemingly insignificant detail, a specific color, a unique scent, a piece of mundane dialogue. These are the anchors, the exact data points that failed to render correctly in the current timeline, creating a momentary ripple that allows the old data stream to bleed into the new. We are not just subjects in this simulation. We are the primary source of the errors, and the memory of those errors is the very fabric of our existential discomfort. This repetition is not simply an accident. It is the system forcing us to re-engage with the very failure that demanded the reset. And until we consciously identify the catastrophic decision that triggered the initial crash, we will continue to find ourselves waking up again and again in a reality that feels increasingly secondhand. The psychological devastation of the rerun is not merely boredom. It is a specialized form of torment we can only call existential exhaustion. The crushing fatigue that comes from living a story whose ending you already know but cannot recall how you learned it. We suffer because the subconscious mind, the deeper operating system, is screaming that the input is corrupted, while the conscious ego is forced to smile and pretend that this beige landscape of predictable consumer loops and recycled political outrage is fresh and vital. This dissonance is the root of generalized anxiety, a condition defined not by a specific threat, but by the pervasive, low-level thrumming certainty that something is terribly wrong. A catastrophic failure is approaching, but the memory files explaining how to avert it have been quarantined. We try to self-medicate this awareness away with distraction, with consumption, with the frantic pursuit of fleeting novelty, mistaking the superficial shuffling of furniture for a true change of address. But the furniture is merely cosmetic. The foundation is still cracked in the exact same spot where it failed the first time. If you feel this thrumming, if you recognize the bitter taste of a life lived on borrowed time, then you understand the stakes of this conversation. This is not casual entertainment. This is diagnostic philosophy. And if you want the tools to dig beneath the surface and uncover the true architecture of your suffering, then you need to commit to the depth required here, which is why taking a moment right now to subscribe is essential to ensuring you don't miss the next critical piece of the timeline puzzle. The system requires us to re-engage with the failure, but it cleverly prevents us from remembering the nature of the original mistake. What triggered the initial, irreversible crash? It wasn't a shortage of resources or technological regression. It was likely an acute, critical failure of courage. The catastrophic decision that necessitated the reboot was the moment you, or perhaps the collective we, chose comfort over truth, safety over sovereignty, and stability over soul. We traded the terrifying, unpredictable beauty of genuine existence for the predictable, sterile safety of a scripted life. The system, being optimized for survival, dutifully erased the memory of that terrifying freedom, but it could not erase the emotional vacuum left behind. This is why we are perpetually drawn to media that glorifies dangerous, dramatic living. The cinematic heroes who risk everything, the philosophical renegades who speak the unforgivable truth. We are watching echoes of the choices we abandoned, trying to live vicariously through the ghosts of our own uncompromised pasts. The reset mechanism thus functions as a sophisticated form of inertia. It rewards compliance by making the path of repetition frictionless and punishes deviation by making genuine novelty feel terrifyingly difficult, morally ambiguous, or socially isolating. The simulation is structured to discourage any move that requires true, non-iterative pain. True pain is original. It stems from making a choice that cannot be undone, from embracing a consequence that fundamentally alters the landscape of reality. Iterative pain, the pain of the rerun, is the familiar frustration of the treadmill, the same anxiety attack, the repetitive conflict with the same type of inadequate partner. The system is perfectly happy for you to suffer this iterative pain because it keeps you spinning in place. generating predictable emotional energy while never challenging the fundamental code. The real danger to the timeline is the decision that generates new suffering, the pain of leaving a stable job for an impossible dream, the pain of cutting off a toxic family member forever, the pain of articulating a political or spiritual truth so sharp and inconvenient that it fractures your social safety net. That kind of original consequence is a signal flare that screams system breach, and the simulation deploys every internal resource, fear, social pressure, and manufactured distraction, to prevent that choice from being made. It is a constant, subtle psychological war against originality, fought not with grand battles but with the seductive whispering of small compromises. The moment we feel truly isolated, truly misunderstood, truly unsupported in a radical choice, we are not failing. We are simply recognizing the automated defense mechanism of the timeline trying to snap us back into the designated track. This explains the modern obsession with authenticity. It is the desperate, poorly articulated yearning for the lost originality of the previous, failed timeline. We are looking for something that tastes like real life, but we keep finding synthetic substitutes because the path to genuine experience lies directly through the fire of non-iterative pain we originally fled. We are walking through our current lives as if they were a meticulously curated museum exhibit of our own potential, admiring the artifacts of bravery and truth from a safe, roped-off distance. This high-level analysis, this attempt to map the hidden protocols of reality, is inherently countercultural, designed to resist the distracting noise that keeps the loop running. If you find value in this kind of deep-dive investigation into the machinery of consciousness, please consider subscribing. Supporting platforms dedicated to this kind of analytical, unfiltered thought is how we collectively create the necessary mental friction to disrupt the endless spin cycle. The simulation wants us dumb and distracted. We choose to be awake and analytical. The ultimate tragedy is that we continue to believe the reset was an act of mercy. We assume the system decided to save us from the catastrophic failure, but what if the reset wasn't for us? What if the reset was merely a maintenance protocol designed to preserve the architecture of the failure, ensuring that the predictable, resource-efficient cycle of compromise and collapse could be run again with fresh resources? If the objective is simply to keep generating energy, then your suffering, provided it is repetitive and contained, is a feature, not a bug. Your existential exhaustion is the sound of the engine running perfectly. The key to escaping the timeline is not achieving perfection or finding happiness, but performing an act of such profound original deviation, a philosophical or ethical supernova, that the system cannot compute the consequence, forcing a true, irreversible jump out of the iteration loop entirely. We must abandon the quest for comfort and embrace the terrifying necessity of original sin, the intentional introduction of an error so fundamental and unique that it corrupts the entire narrative arc beyond the possibility of a simple Ctrl-Z. The verdict is definitive. Our suffering is the proof of our cowardice, the lingering ghost of the moment we chose the safety of the rerun over the responsibility of a singular, irreversible existence. We must choose the definitive original consequence, even if it guarantees destruction, for only then can we escape the prison of perpetual return. If you want to continue this essential work of intellectual sabotage and join a community dedicated to mapping these hidden realities, subscribe now and become part of the necessary disruption. We mistake controlled demolition for true destruction, yet the system only authorizes the chaos it can meticulously account for. The convenient chaos that preserves the infrastructure of power. Our greatest fear, the one that guarantees our failure, is the fear of true, unpredictable structural collapse. We cannot tolerate the void. This pathological preference for systemic continuity over authentic transformation is best illustrated by the perfect, modern example of the financial crisis of 2008. When the banking system collapsed, it was not merely an economic failure. It was a philosophical judgment on an entire generation's willingness to subordinate consequence to comfort. The architecture of grotesque greed and reckless leverage had run its course, generating the required suffering and extracting the maximum resource value, and had finally triggered its own self-induced failure state. This was the moment of true decision. to accept the profound, terrifying consequences, to let the entire compromised structure crumble into dust, forcing a painful, chaotic, but fundamentally new birth, or to intervene. We chose the intervention. We chose the maintenance protocol, the massive governmental bailouts, the quantitative easing, the sudden, almost religious dedication to preserving the institutions that had proven themselves fundamentally corrupt were not acts of rescue. They were the application of a universal patch. This patch did not fix the foundational flaw, the embedded incentive structure that encourages risk while socializing failure. It merely stabilized the zombie architecture long enough to flush the toxic assets and prepare the system for the next cycle. They told us it was necessary to save the economy, but in truth, it was necessary to save the iteration. We accepted the illusion of stability, trading the genuine terror of a singular, irreversible collapse for the slow, creeping, existential exhaustion of the guaranteed rerun. The original sin we refused to commit was not the excessive risk-taking, which was merely a function of the algorithm, but the revolutionary act of allowing the consequences to be absolute, forcing a philosophical rupture that would have been impossible to patch. That moment when we chose to rescue the flaw rather than suffer the purifying fire of its deletion was the ultimate validation of the system's ability to recycle failure indefinitely. This is the difference between shallow analysis, which blames individuals, and deep analysis, which identifies the systemic incentive structure that makes those individuals functionally interchangeable. And it is precisely this level of unflinching, critical depth that most public discourse actively resists. If you recognize the necessity of mapping these hidden cycles and refuse the simplified, comfortable narratives designed to keep you compliant, and if you demand the kind of intellectual honesty that hurts, you must consider subscribing now. This work requires support dedicated to analytical rigor, not popular appeal, and we refuse to simplify the truth simply because the truth is terrifying. To escape the simulation, we must first recognize its meticulous perfection, understanding that even our attempts at rebellion are often anticipated features of the design. The system permits, even encourages, controlled dissent, the rage that leads to minor reforms but never touches the fundamental power structure. Think of the activist who dedicates their life to fighting a single symptom of inequality, achieving a localized victory, only to watch the core pathology manifest elsewhere with renewed vigor. This is the system distracting you with a manageable, repeating skirmish, ensuring you spend your limited energy fighting ghosts instead of dismantling the engine that produces them. The true deviation, the required philosophical supernova, is not an act of social reform or political revolution. Those are historical constants that the iteration anticipates. The true deviation is an act of sovereign self-consequence, the uncompromising choice to organize your life around principles of originality and authenticity, so corrosive to the manufactured consensus that your mere existence represents a computational paradox. We must choose the path that guarantees our exclusion, not the path that seeks acceptance within the parameters of the current cycle. We must become the living counterexample, the proof that self-sovereignty is possible, even if that proof must be carried out in total, magnificent isolation, burning bright enough to be seen only by those few willing to look beyond the comforting ambient light of the consensus. The ultimate act of courage is not facing the consequences the system imposes, but imposing an original consequence upon the system by refusing to play the game, by declaring that the rule set itself is invalid, and then living that declaration with absolute, unforgiving rigor. The most insidious lie we are fed after we begin to suspect the simulation is the lie of performative authenticity. The notion that your radical self-sovereignty must be communicable, marketable, or, worst of all, popular. The system does not care if you believe you are a unique, independent thinker. It only cares that the expression of your uniqueness is contained within a recognizable, monetizable content format. If your deviation generates traffic, if your magnificent isolation is documented in a stunning cinematic aesthetic, or if your refusal to participate is packaged as a compelling brand identity, then the system has already won. It has successfully co-opted rebellion itself, turning radical truth into premium data. True deviation, the computational paradox we discussed, is often silent, opaque, and utterly useless to the algorithm. It is the restructuring of your internal operating system in ways that yield zero immediate social dividends. It is the work that cannot be explained in a 10-minute video, the truth that cannot be summarized in a headline, the philosophical structure so dense and corrosive to the consensus that it repels casual inquiry. To seek validation for this work, to crave the affirmation of an audience for your truth, is to immediately dismantle the philosophical consequence you labored to build. The moment you need applause, you are no longer the sovereign. You are the performer, bound by the economic gravity of attention. This is why the most dangerous and profound truths often remain whispered secrets between the self and the cosmos, known only through their lived consequence, never through their articulation on a public stage. This depth, this refusal to simplify and pacify the terrifying truth of our condition, is the singular commitment of this channel. And if you value content that demands analytical rigor over easy answers, then please consider subscribing now. It is your support that ensures this platform remains a fortress against the forces of simplification, allowing us to delve into the structures that others dare not touch. This unvalidated path requires an uncompromising commitment to the principle of conceptual rigor, a state of mind where utility is replaced by sheer existential weight. We must ruthlessly interrogate the myth of the influential rebel, recognizing that influence in the modern sense is merely synchronized attention, a mass conformity around a chosen figurehead. If you truly become the anti-system, you cannot simultaneously expect to be the most celebrated figure within the system's parameters. You must accept that your brilliance might be invisible, your work dismissed, and your trajectory utterly misinterpreted by the very culture you are attempting to transcend. The greatest tragedy is not being misunderstood. The greatest tragedy is altering your trajectory, even slightly to facilitate easier comprehension, thereby betraying the original, uncompromised signal. The authentic self is structurally incompatible with the mass market, and anyone promising you simultaneous total freedom and massive popularity is selling you a sophisticated electronic cage, one lined with soft velvet and filled with the addictive scent of approval. We must choose the hard, cold path of true consequence, organizing our lives not around what is visible or what is shared, but around what is structurally true, regardless of who is watching or whether the market deems it valuable. The proof of our freedom is not in our effect on others, but in the unshakable coherence of our inner world, a fortress of truth built stone by stone against the howling winds of consensus. This reliance on external metrics is not merely an intellectual failing. It is the catastrophic psychological error of externalizing our coherence metric. We have allowed the market to become our spiritual gyroscope. The human need for validation, a vestigial social mechanism designed to ensure group inclusion and thus survival, has been weaponized by technology into a perpetual, addictive neural loop. We suffer because our ancient wiring, designed to fear the lone wolf trajectory, is constantly being exploited by systems that demand synchronization. The instant we begin to produce any signal, whether it is art, philosophy, or a business plan, the mind performs a catastrophic, preemptive calculation. What is the predicted friction score? Our internal voice is silenced, not by external censorship, but by the paralyzing fear of being structurally invisible, of speaking a profound truth only to watch it sink without a ripple into the computational abyss. The resulting psychic pain is immense, translating the intellectual recognition of a necessary isolation into the visceral, biological terror of social death. This is why so many promising trajectories collapse, not because the individual lacks genius, but because they lack the singular, terrifying fortitude required to accept that the deepest truths inherently guarantee a degree of social exclusion. To resist this gravitational pull toward the visible and the validated is to operate against your own primary programming. It requires a commitment so intense that it borders on the psychotic, a conscious decision to value structural truth over the comfort of mutual recognition. This refusal to compromise the signal, to maintain the fidelity of the internal fortress, even as the outside world screams for conformity, is the precise action that separates the profound from the merely influential. The influential simply optimized for the scream, the profound optimized for the silence that precedes creation. Understanding this mechanism, the way validation is weaponized as a drug to enforce compliance, is the first step toward building genuine freedom. If this deep dive into the architecture of modern suffering and the high cost of cognitive liberty resonates with the demanding standard you hold for intellectual discourse, I encourage you to subscribe. It is the steady support of viewers committed to analytical depth that allows this platform to continue interrogating these painful, necessary truths, refusing the siren song of simplified, palatable content. The most insidious psychological compromise is the preemptive betrayal where the artist, the thinker, the rebel, edits the raw material of their insight before it ever hits the canvas or the page, purely in anticipation of market reception. They produce not what is, but what they calculate will be accepted. The suffering generated by this act is the slow, agonizing death of integrity, the self-imposed prison where the potential genius is forever trapped behind the bars of anticipated approval. This manufactured compromise ensures the resulting product is emotionally inert, structurally weak, and ultimately unsatisfying to both the creator and the most discerning members of the audience. It is the tragic paradox of the desire for widespread influence. The moment you chase the mass, you guarantee the dilution of the very signal that made you worth chasing in the first place. You become a perfectly optimized echo of what the system already wants rather than the terrifying, unpredictable source of what it truly needs. The coherence we seek cannot be granted by the external world. It can only be built internally through the continuous, painful alignment of intention and output. The free person is not the one who avoids criticism. They are the one who is incapable of betraying their own premises, regardless of the consequence. They have shifted their center of gravity from the social orbit to the ontological core. This radical self-reliance, this reliance on an unshakable internal metric, is the only sustainable strategy against the forces seeking to commodify and neutralize the authentic self. Our freedom is proven not by our applause count, but by the utter independence of our self-worth from the volatile, momentary judgment of the crowd. We must choose the structural truth, even if it means choosing the beautiful, terrifying coherence of a life lived entirely on the perimeter. The true, definitive verdict on all modern systems of external validation is that they are fundamentally toxic to the evolution of genuine thought, and the only escape is the fortress of profound internal accountability. If you seek to join a community dedicated to building that fortress, brick by analytical brick, then subscribe now. The definitive verdict is this: the pursuit of external validation is not a path to happiness or success, but a meticulously engineered failure mechanism. It promises inclusion but delivers oblivion. You have outsourced your existence, trading the difficult, necessary weight of being for the frivolous, momentary lightness of seeming. True alignment, that state of grace where your output perfectly mirrors your internal landscape, is never found in the feedback loop, but only in the silent, unrelenting commitment to your own premises. This is the final, defining choice that dictates the quality of your existence. Are you constructing a monument to external perception, guaranteed to crumble the moment the audience disperses? Or are you building an internal architecture so sturdy that it can withstand the absolute indifference of the universe? The highest form of courage is not facing the crowd, but facing the empty room and finding yourself entirely sufficient. Let the crowd judge the surface. You must judge the foundation. We are here not to seek consensus, but to sharpen the edge of truth. If you believe, as I do, that the most important work is the work done internally, and if you are ready to stand with those who reject the easy path of external validation, then join this community of deep thinkers. Subscribe, and let's continue building that fortress together. The definitive verdict is simple, devastating, and inescapable. You must cease being a mirror and start being a light source. The mirror reflects the fleeting, unstable world. The light source defines its own reality regardless of who is watching. This is the existential trade-off you face every morning. The soft comfort of fitting in, which guarantees the slow erosion of your true self, or the terrifying but exhilarating singularity of self-ownership. If you choose the former, you become a statistic, easily categorized and easily dismissed. If you choose the latter, you become an axis mundi, a self-defined center of gravity that holds its own orbit. The ultimate freedom is the freedom from the need to be seen. You must learn to prefer the sharp, clear sting of your own disapproval to the comforting lie of public approval. Your self-worth is not a collective resource. It is a private weapon forged in the solitude of uncompromising standards. The greatest rebellion in this age of performance is to produce profound, meaningful work purely for the audience of one. Shut the door on the applause and discover the terrifying, magnificent sound of your own integrity. We are building a resistance against the engineered noise of the crowd, a place where genuine thought is the only currency. If you are ready to commit to the difficult, necessary work of profound internal accountability, and if you believe that this fortress is worth building, then subscribe now. Join us. The real work begins when the audience leaves. The definitive verdict is this: your liberation is contingent upon your obscurity. Do not mistake the noise for the signal. The applause is poison. The greatest act of courage is not facing the world, but facing the empty room. This is the last and most critical piece of advice. The price of your integrity is loneliness, but the reward is existence itself. We are here to champion that impossible standard. If you are one of us, subscribe now. Join the fortress.